The last speaker for this evening would be Ms. Manny Maung. Ms. Manny Maung comes to us from Human Rights Watch. She's a Myanmar researcher at Human Rights Watch. Research focuses on widespread human rights issues in Myanmar, including atrocity crimes committed against the Rohingya and other ethnic minorities, arbitrary arrest, detention, torture, sexual violence, and so on. Since 1st February 2021, military coup, she has focused significantly on the renewed military abuses against the population that amounts to crime against humanity and war crimes. Ms. Manny Maung, thanks for joining us. I'm not sure which part of the world you are now, but where we are, it's already evening though.
I'm in Australia with Chris, so we're both doing a late evening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. The floor is all yours. Please carry on. You have a few minutes to submit, and then we'll follow up with the questions. But go ahead.
Thank you. I'll do my best. Thank you, Excellencies, for the opportunity to speak here, and thank you to APHR for inviting me. I'm heartened this International Parliamentary Inquiry on the international response to the situation in Myanmar is occurring, because many people in and from Myanmar believe that international attention to the country is waning. A year and a half after the February 2021 coup, military atrocities against the population continue unabated. Recent footage has emerged of alleged killings in Myanmar's Sagaing region, where the UN Special Rapporteur on Myanmar has documented apparent war crimes committed by the Myanmar military. Radio Free Asia reports that the footage, recovered from a cell phone belonging to a Myanmar soldier, shows about 30 men in custody in Montainpin village in Ayador township on May 10. At least 5 of the villagers later appeared dead, their hands bound, shot from behind. 3 soldiers who record themselves in the footage even brag about how many people they've each killed. There is no evidence whatsoever that military commanders are acting to stop such atrocities, and they may be even implicated in them. If verified, the footage simply confirms what Human Rights Watch and others have been documenting since the coup. We've documented that the military and police, along with pro-military militias, have committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, including mass killings, torture, arbitrary arrests, and indiscriminate attacks on civilians. Military airstrikes continue to pound villages across the country, creating new waves of growing refugee crisis. The UN estimates at least 760,000 people have been displaced since the coup, and the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners says that more than 2,000 people have been killed and 14,000 arbitrarily detained by the security forces, which is probably a gross underestimate. International efforts to hold the military junta accountable are falling short. The ASEAN 5-point consensus plan has gotten nowhere due to the recalcitrance of the junta, which has repeatedly blocked ASEAN envoy access to senior NLD leaders such as Aung San Suu Kyi and restricted humanitarian aid. The 5-point consensus, meanwhile, has become a convenient pretext for governments such as the UK, the United States, Australia, and European Union member states to delay real action under the guise of waiting for ASEAN leadership. The junta has exploited the international community's deference to the regional bloc, which is a long record of neglecting its responsibility to protect the people of Southeast Asia under its principles of non-interference and consensus. ASEAN members should drop their failed 5-point consensus approach to Myanmar. Instead, like-minded ASEAN members, including Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, should develop a clear time-bound approach to pressure the junta to end its abuses, including signaling support for additional sanctions on oil and gas revenues, and to press the United Nations Security Council members to pursue a resolution that would institute a global arms embargo and give the International Criminal Court a mandate over the situation. Security Council action on Myanmar is long overdue, and concerned governments should press Russia and China not to veto a resolution. If they block action on Myanmar, they will need to explain to UN member states why they have chosen to side with the military implicated in numerous atrocity crimes. Besides the UN Security Council, governments can use national and regional mechanisms to expend efforts to financially isolate the junta, meanwhile expanding cross-border humanitarian aid efforts into Myanmar through local ethnic organizations and civil society partners. Since the coup, over 60,000 refugees have fled to Thailand and other neighboring countries. These governments should end all forced returns of asylum seekers and instead ensure refugees receive access to aid and international protection procedures, as well as to facilitate emergency cross-border aid. Myanmar's economy is suffering, but not because of targeted sanctions and due to the military junta's ineptitude and economic mismanagement. Its stranglehold on the country and utter disregard for human life is pulling Myanmar even deeper into a spiral of conflict and impunity with no end. I'll reinforce here what other speakers have already said. Inaction is not an option. Some important steps have been taken towards accountability. A criminal investigation under the principles of universal jurisdiction is underway in Argentina. An ICC probe into crimes against humanity over the forced deportation of ethnic Rohingya to neighboring Bangladesh during the 2017 Rohingya crisis is also ongoing. According to reports, Turkish judicial authorities have recently also opened up a preliminary inquiry into complaints of torture following the coup. So other governments should support these and other credible efforts towards justice for victims. The Myanmar military should know the world is watching and that they won't be allowed to continue committing abuses with impunity. Thank you, Excellencies.
Thanks, Manny, for the overview. Questions from the panel? Can I go first, if you don't mind? Manny, you raised this issue of the 5-point consensus of ASEAN, or ASEAN's 5-point consensus, and you said it's going nowhere. If you were asked to make a recommendation on what should happen to the 5-point consensus, one, throw it in the rubbish bin because it's got no impact at all. Number two, to rethink some of the provisions, what would you suggest?
Look, I think previous speakers have also highlighted this, and I'm really pleased to be able to reiterate some of the points that they've made because I fully agree. I think throwing it in the rubbish bin is a really, really good idea, considering that the Myanmar military have shown absolutely no will or indication that it's going to follow any of these plans. And if anything, this is what they do. They agree on the basis that they'll be allowed to continue doing whatever they want. And we know that. So why do we keep allowing them to do that? On your second part about rethinking it, I think the Malaysian foreign minister highlighted really well in his presentation. We need parameters where the military must be held accountable. And this starts with action plans that are concrete. And if they miss meeting any of those agreements, then there must be some kind of punishment that's meted out. And at this point in time, there is no such plan in place. So, Charles, you also mentioned previously that something like a plus action towards these points is necessary. And I think that that's the case now. It's clear that it's not working, and it's clear that the military is just using it as a bargaining chip that only benefits them and no one else.
Can I just take one of your ideas and just pursue that a bit and get your views on this? You were saying, okay, now let's rethink a timeline. And together with the timeline, you have some kind of a punishment mechanism in place. Should that punishment mechanism also involve arms embargo and just embargo on the military and those kinds of stuff? I'm just trying to see how to make the 5-point plan workable. Some people have said we need to change the character of the special envoy. We need to have a standalone special envoy and not attached to any one country. And there's suggestions just to help improve the system. At the end of the day, it has got no impact on the Myanmar government. Absolutely no impact at all. So would something like, if you put an addition, a plus, like if you don't do this in 3 months, then it's an automatic provision that global, embargo on arms global embargo on free flow of illicit funds, something like that, though.
Yeah, I mean, this is the point. I think after 12 months of absolute inaction and lack of adherence to the 5-point plan, it's clear that the Myanmar military won't do anything. So if we're going to renegotiate any new parameters, which I still feel they will never meet, the point is that ASEAN countries should be considering sanctions to be put in place as well. And I think what's been really clear from a lot of these conversations is that the ASEAN member states do not have to wait for consensus from the ASEAN bloc. They have the ability to put these parameters in place as independent states. And I think some real leadership is necessary now. And I'm counting down the days until Indonesia takes the chair again of ASEAN, because Cambodia's leadership here has been completely woeful and shouldn't be followed.
Thanks for that. Ladies first, though. Mercy.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. Manny, thank you very much for your sharing. I have several questions for you. First, you mentioned before about international protection procedures. I think in terms of international protection procedures, in social economy protection, in security of safety protection procedures, how to make all the international protections procedures can be running effectively, because until now international efforts sometimes lack of protection efforts. The second is sometimes it's really so slow in UN body or international agency as well. The second, I just curious about the situation of the human rights defenders of Myanmar peoples, or the other what we call it, oppositions parliamentarians who are detained in by the military junta. Can you give the brief information related with all the people in detained now in military junta dictatorship in all jails, and maybe you can give the positioning of the military junta in the urban city and in the ethnic village city. All the commanding comes from the top level, or it's a different level. In the village maybe come from the local village military junta power or something like that. And because the atrocity have the same face all over the state or all over the stage. So I don't know. This is the same structure of the military junta commanding type, related with the type of atrocity, type of oppressive, type of the what we call it, the violence types. Okay, maybe this is my curiosity.
Well, actually, thank you, Excellency. I might actually start with that first, because I think that frames the need for protection afterwards. So a lot of my work is on documenting human rights violations, and something that has taken up a lot of my time actually in the past several months has been documenting what happens to people after they're detained, and often arbitrarily detained with no arrest warrant, during raids of their homes in the evening. And generally speaking, it is both police and soldiers who are identified as the people who are arresting the anti-military supporters. But sometimes they are people in plainclothes who don't identify themselves and are usually suspected to be pro-military militia members. So you asked about, the level of violations and how that's been spread out across urban and rural areas. And the point is that there seems to have been a green light given to everyone, police, security forces, members of the military, that any type of violence is going to be okay to use. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So in the cities and in rural villages, night raids are still continuing. What's happening is now a very closed and opaque system of detention where people are taken, the people who are arresting them don't identify themselves, and then we don't know where they're taken to until afterwards. Sometimes they report, actually often they report that they've been mistreated, and that includes beatings during the arrest, but often also torture under detention. They don't know where they've been held. They don't know for how long they're going to be held in one facility, and then they're taken to another facility for processing. In some cases, they even turn up dead, and the family members are told to come and pick up the bodies. So these kinds of atrocity crimes and unlawful killings are happening almost daily. What we can verify is only a small number, because again, to safely contact the family members, to safely contact the witnesses is very difficult now that we know that there's live surveillance of telephone calls happening. So we have to do that in a way that doesn't jeopardize the witnesses themselves. This is happening to human rights defenders. This is happening to former NLD members. This is happening to anyone who's deemed as a supporter of the democracy movement. And to answer your first question, the problem here is that, yes, the processing of refugees is very slow. And I just want to confirm what Tom Andrew said earlier, is that as soon as an individual crosses a boundary into another country to seek protection, they are automatically considered a refugee until their paperwork is processed. And the paperwork is not being processed fast enough simply because people, A, don't have the paperwork when they're fleeing, but B, yes, the process is very slow. In a country like Thailand, which isn't a signatory to the Refugee Convention, it has considerably slowed down. So we do need Thailand to take up their mantle to help protect these refugees. But also, I think other countries across the board also need to increase their humanitarian uptake. So, I'm sitting in Australia where it is shameful because we've not yet imposed sanctions, and we do need to desperately increase our humanitarian visa uptake. I know a lot of people are trying to get here and they can't, or there's a bottleneck in Bangkok. And this is something that, we'd really, really seek help from other member states to be able to help facilitate the faster processing of it. So, when we're talking about humanitarian protection, we're talking about people who are going to go back to a country that automatically already sees them as an opposition, an enemy. It's most likely that they will be detained again. Of the people who I know who have been deported, many of them have ended up back in detention, and I don't know what's happened to them.
Thanks, Manny. Nitipon? You had a question, right?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not Thailand bashing here, but yes, I need to highlight a lot of what we need.
Nitipon, you have to responsible in the borderline.
If I were Prime Minister, I would fix everything. All right. So first of all, when I'm thinking, I'm listening about the situation in Thailand, because it is very same, it is similar the situation, right? So I'm just thinking like this. For this ridiculous cycle, it has like a big companies, and then a military, and then people and then corruption, and then military again and again, like this cycle, and for under a military coup, it impacts to everyone in the country. So I just imagine that it is possible. From your research, it is possible that for companies, domestic companies or international companies can do a business, in Myanmar without benefiting for the Myanmar militaries, and do the other thing that benefiting for ordinary Burmese people. Is it possible? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really great question, because it's something that a lot of people are now considering, especially, we've just seen Kieran say that they're going to withdraw as well, the Japanese beverage company. And I think that had they withdrawn when we'd first made the recommendations after 2017, they would have avoided a lot of headache now, and definitely, not a reputation backlash as they've suffered. At this point in time, I do not think that international companies can enter Myanmar and be seen to be a responsible and credible business. If they enter Myanmar, the way that they're going to have to do this on a technicality is to always get approval from the Directorate of Investment and MIC. And these are now under, of course, the military's junta apparatus. So at every point of the way, they're going to have a dealing with some kind of military arm. And so we would recommend that companies don't come in, particularly if they are adhering to those guiding principles of business and human rights that Tom Andrews mentioned earlier. For the companies that remain inside Myanmar, I do know that some of them are trying to do the right thing. And I have spoken to several who have asked me, what should they do? So I've said to them, look, Chris Sidoti's excellent FFM report lays it out very clearly. You should do your due diligence, ensure that you don't have any ties to military ownership, let alone military subsidiaries. And if you do, you should try to cut ties and responsibly exit. Responsibly exiting also has several different meanings. And of course, it all depends on the contracts that they have. But what we would want is the least amount of impact on the workers and the staff. And I think the garment sector is a really, really good example of this, where a lot of European companies are involved, a lot of ASEAN countries are involved in the manufacturing and supply chain process. And many have come to me to ask what they should do. And I know several who have actually cut ties with factories who they believe to be directly linked with the military or have subsidiaries in some way. And they continue to monitor the labor rights and the situation for workers in other factories that aren't tied to the military. But in this environment, it's very difficult for garment workers or other workers to be operating in a safe way. Number one, even getting to work, they often have to cross through a military barricade, right? Number two, they get harassed on the way there. Number three, if they are suffering any type of labor rights abuses, whether it's overtime or being underpaid or being abused or harassed, there's nobody really to report it to. So none of these conditions are ideal. And it certainly doesn't enrich Myanmar, and it certainly doesn't benefit the workers or the economy. But I would argue that this is not because of targeted sanctions. This is because of the complete ineptitude of the Myanmar military to be a government of any kind, let alone to be ruling. So all the knock-on effects will eventually not just harm Myanmar people, but regionally we will suffer too. And we will see more refugees crossing onto the region. And I think that's why it's really imperative that ASEAN and other member states, other UN states, UN member states, really address the issue here now. I love the idea of putting out something now saying that there can be no credible election next year. I think that's really important. That's fundamentally something that the military has used as an excuse over and over again. But, you know, in terms of something that you asked Chris Sidoti before, public pressure is really important. Public pressure is why we've seen the likes of Kirin withdraw. Pressure on investors. That's why we've seen Total and Chevron withdraw. So we can't underestimate the power of the public. And I think that one of the strongest movements that I've seen that have really given heart to the people in Myanmar is our regional three-finger salute movement. It's, you know, it's symbolic, but it means something to us, and it gives us heart to keep on going. And I think these types of steps are really important. And if Myanmar people see that their ASEAN member regional states are continuing to support them, they will also keep fighting.
All right. Any closing questions from Mercy or Nitipon?
Charles?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Just it's
Keep it short. We are running out of time already.
Yep. It's very interesting. Manny, what do you think about the biggest pressure for the junta military, but give the least risk for the Myanmar people? Because we need the pressure for the junta, but the other side, we think of the surviving life of the Myanmar people. What do you think?
I think it is pressuring the UN security sanction to pass a resolution on an arms embargo. They have a responsibility here under their charter to protect people. And this is the biggest pressure that the military will have. And if countries then have to stop selling weapons to Myanmar, the military can no longer harm the people. And that is the least risk. That is the scenario that we want to see. It's not a far-reaching or unreachable aim. I think it's something that we will have to see through, because at this point in time, with the levels of violence that are going on, to what end, right? Yeah.
Nitipon, last question. No questions?
No,
okay.
no question.
Many closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts. Look, I think, again, it's really important to stress how we all here think in some way that ASEAN hasn't really come through, right? But I think it's really important that we acknowledge that each of the member states have a role to play, and it's very powerful. And I'm really heartened to see that these conversations are still happening a year and a half later, because as I first mentioned, it feels like international attention is waning. It feels like inside Myanmar people have been left on their own, and it's really important that we keep continuing to speak up for them. And I'm very grateful to all of you here today. It's very important, the work that you're doing. So please keep on going, and please keep speaking up for us.
Thanks, Manny. Thanks for that. And with that, we conclude the discussions for the inquiry for today. We'll meet, I think, in 2 weeks' time. We don't have one next week, next Wednesday. I think the one after that is on July 20th is the next inquiry. Manny, thank you very much. Chris, thanks. Tom, if you're still around, thank you very much. And with that, we conclude today's inquiry. Thank you very much. And have a good night or good evening or even a good morning, wherever you are.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Manny.
Thank you,
everyone. Bye-bye.
See you next month.